Hello, my name is Emmy DeGrappa. Each week, we bring you stories asking our guests the question why. We learn about passion, purpose, and the human experience. Brought to you by Wyoming Humanities with the generous support of the Wyoming Community Foundation. This is What's Your Why? Today, we are talking to lifelong creative Caryn Flanagan, and her newest work is called Heaven in Your Bones. Welcome, Caryn.
Thank you, Emmy. Great to be here.
Yeah, and I love calling you a lifelong creative because your whole life you've been working in creativity in some way. Tell me all the ways that you've been creating and aspiring and learning new things.
Oh my gosh. Well, I don't know how much time we have, so I'll just give you the bullet points. I think my first love was writing as a child. I did a lot of writing as a young person. My second love was theater, which I discovered at the ripe old age of 12, and worked professionally in theater. That's actually how I met you. 15 years ago, maybe? I don't know. I've worked in jewelry design. I had a little side hobby that I turned into a side hustle, and it was a great little business when my kids were young, a work-from-home business that I sold after a few years. Full circle back to writing with this project.
Well, tell me about this project, Heaven in Your Bones, and what was your journey to start writing this, and how did this become a passion of yours?
So 20 years ago, my family suffered a terrible tragedy. My mom and dad were killed in a plane crash in Alaska. And that impacted us all extraordinarily deeply and was a hard thing to reconcile. It's a lifetime of walking through grief and getting to know it and coming to terms with it. And this particular book sprung from a conversation that happened maybe the day we even got the news. You can imagine that we got the phone call late one night, end of August 2000, and we were up all night trying to figure out what this meant for us and what we were going to do and how we were going to tell our children, who were 6 and 4 at the time, very young. And we consulted with some friends and some professionals who gave us advice on how to talk to the kids about this, about loss. And so we started that journey. And Sarah, our youngest, well, both of them, they asked lots of questions. And kids want to know, when you say to them, well, your grandparents have gone to heaven and we're not going to see them again. And they want to know what that means. Well, where is heaven? And what do you mean I'm not going to see them again? And so we tried to explain that in a way they were with you, that they're always a part of you, that they'll be watching over you. And these were the kind of conversations we had throughout the day. And later that evening, Sarah, who was only 4 at the time, came into my room and she said, "So, Mom, does that mean that heaven is in your bones?" And I'll never forget that moment. I just got goosebumps and I thought, wow, that's something I need to use someday because that's so profound and it's simple, but it's beautiful. And I was just blown away with how her young mind processed that in such a simple but profound manner. And so this book honors what my family experienced, but also the wisdom of a young child under duress.
And after you heard that and you kind of took that into yourself and said, I relate to that. I get that. I'm going to use that because it obviously resonated with you too.
Yes, it did. And I don't know, honestly, if it was I'm going to use that at the time, but it was certainly I'm going to remember that.
Well, that's what I meant.
And I'll use it through just through my healing process. But then at some point, it became clear that was a message that I wanted to share with the world. And I wasn't really clear on how to do that. And I just sat with it for a while. Obviously, we were dealing with a lot of other things at the time. So I think maybe 5 or 6 years later, I started thinking back on that, and I came up with a manuscript for what was the original book. So this has been in my system for a really long time, literally 20 years. So I'm really happy to have it finally out in the world.
So you've literally been thinking about, because you're a creative writer anyway,
Yes.
and because you've done a lot of theater.
Mm-hmm.
Have you written plays as well?
I have.
Okay.
Yes.
So that really is part of who you are, is to put something out there in the world, and this was probably broiling up to the surface.
Yeah. It just felt, for me, those messages through the written word are expressions that deserve a life beyond the soul that created them or the brain that created them. And this became, a children's story became the wheels for this to happen. And the original manuscript was lengthy and wordy, and every word was precious to me, and I just didn't really know how to put it out in the world. I was afraid that an editor was just going to slash and cut and burn, and it wouldn't look anything like my story. But I did, a year ago, in 2019, I took this manuscript to the Jackson Hole Writers Conference and got some critique and feedback on it, and that really was exceptionally helpful to me, in terms of shaping it, defining it, figuring out who my audience was, and then really how to tell that story to that audience. And it's a young audience, 3 to 6 years old is really the target for this book. I know it's a hard topic to talk about with children, death and dying, especially sudden loss. But I was encouraged by professionals in the mental health realm who said there were really very few resources for young kids, and to go for it. So I did. And so here it is.
That is super exciting. And I think writing it from that perspective is something probably very needed. And I noticed that your book proceeds go to a nonprofit organization called Access.
Yes. Aircraft casualty support for people who've lost loved ones in airline accidents. And they will get the proceeds from this book above my landed costs of publication. So, yeah, I'm very happy to share these proceeds with them. They offer phone consults, and they'll pair people together who have experienced similar losses. The woman who started it, her name is Heidi Snow, and she lost her fiancé in the Lockerbie crash. There was a big airliner crash over Scotland, like 30 years ago. Anyhow, that prompted her to start this nonprofit, and she has consulted and helped people all over the world who are dealing with that type of loss.
Do you go through that grieving process all over again when you write a book like this?
Because I started this so long ago and then kept coming back to it, not every time, but there certainly were times I feel like when there were breakthroughs in the writing process where it would suddenly make itself known to me and say, that's your story, boom, that's it, and it would just wreck me. It was an emotional process, to be sure. And now that I'm sending it out into the world and getting responses from people, whether they knew my mom and dad or not, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling all those feels, but in a really positive and uplifting way. And I'm so glad I went through with this. Again, it's such a personal story, and I just didn't know that people would want to read it, but apparently they do.
And maybe it's not just the plane crash, but it's also children who lose their parents in many other ways and experience that same loss, that you probably have created a way for them to work through that through your book.
Sure. Everyone is experiencing loss at this time, whether it's loss of a job, loss of a lifestyle, loss of contact with friends. COVID has changed our world, and yes, this story focuses in on a specific type of loss, but the aftermath and what you're left with and what a child processes is probably pretty similar, whether it was a plane crash or some other devastating event.
Caryn, this is the first book you've written, correct?
Yes.
So what kind of lessons did you learn that you could share about writing a book, writing a children's book, and the steps you have to go through to make it happen?
So it's a great question. Number one, I would say get as much feedback as possible. get it into the hands of people whose opinion you value and people who might challenge you a little bit. Get it in front of strangers too, because they're going to be more candid with you than your best friend. If you have a story to tell, be brave and just tell it. Nobody has lived your experience, and so your perspective is unique. Even though to you it seems mundane and everyday, it's because you live with it every day. But to everybody else out there, it's a fresh story. So be brave and tell your story. And then the third thing would be that there's one thing about writing a book, but then once you've pushed send and it's done, it takes on a life of its own, in which you have to wear lots of hats. You become a marketing director, a finance director, all of these things that maybe writers who, some happen to be a little bit introverted, these are hard things for writers to do, I think. So I have a whole new respect for writers who find success after publication, but they do so through their own grit and their own gumption. Having worked in theater for a number of years, I'm comfortable in front of a crowd. I'm comfortable in front of a microphone. If I had been writing these past 40 years, not working out in front of crowds, it would be another story. So I really have a lot of respect for writers who then go out on the road and talk to people about their books. That's got to be a big deal for them.
And scary.
Yeah, for sure.
Caryn, tell me what was, after you talked about process, it's always really interesting to learn how you choose illustrations and how you choose an artist. So for Heaven in Your Bones, I had a very clear image of what I wanted, the feel that I wanted. And one day, I live in East Jackson, and one day I was waiting at the bus stop to go to the village to ski, and I was looking at a public art installation. I don't know, a few years ago, Public Art did this installation where they hired local artists to do wraps for these electrical boxes. Well, the electrical box by the START bus stop at Redmond has the most charming illustration of a young girl running barefoot through a field of wildflowers. She has a board tucked under her arm, and she's running up towards these snow-capped mountains. And you assume it's a snowboard, maybe a surfboard, we don't know, but it has this levity and this energy and this lightness that I absolutely adored. So I did a little research and found out that artist that created that is Kelly Halpin. And Kelly Halpin is, I think she was born and raised here in Jackson, and she's a terrific artist, illustrator, and she's also a total badass mountain athlete and a wonderful young woman. So I hired her I commissioned her to do the artwork for Heaven in Your Bones, and she did a spectacular job. The story goes from kind of this realism to a little bit of mysticism as the kids sort of delve into these deeper questions of what is heaven and how does it all work. And Kelly did a spectacular job of morphing that reality and adding some twinges of sort of mysticism to her artwork. And I just love the outcome. She did a terrific job. That is exciting. I can't wait to see that. Were you surprised at how welcoming your book was, how it was well received? Were you blown away by that?
Totally. Yes. I only ordered a small number of books that I thought I would sell personally. The rest are available online. And I figured that a handful of people would contact me and say, I would love a copy of your book. And I figured it would be like my aunts and uncles and maybe my old neighbor. And I'd get one to my mother-in-law. And I've had to reorder twice now, and it's been a week. So, and such an incredible thing. One of my little side hustles is I work as a ski instructor, and I work with this extraordinary gentleman from New York. And I told him about my book, and he said, I'm sending you money to buy 50 copies of the book so that you can donate them wherever you like. So I'm going to have 50 extra copies. Did I say that right? 50 extra copies to donate to schools, preschools, wherever it can be of use. So I'm really excited about that and really honored by his gift.
And what does Access think about this? I bet they're super excited that not only did you create something that is so relevant for like you were saying, people during this time are experiencing loss in many different ways. And so it's really an amazing gift to them as well as an organization.
Yeah, I think they're happy to have the book as a resource that they can recommend for their clients, and I'm sure they're happy to have some extra funds too. Yeah, and we're really happy to provide that for them.
So what has this done for your girls? Because they knew their grandparents, and then they lost them, and then you wrote this book, and was that full of conversation with them about how they felt then and how they feel now?
Oh, that's such a great question. Over the years, well, when we first lost my parents, we said we're going to keep their names alive, Grandma Ellen and Grandpa Allen. We'll talk about them daily. We're gonna just keep them close. 20 years goes by, and a lot of water under the bridge. They're still a part of us, 100%. I think that for my kids, it was more their observation of my process of grief. And I feel like creating this book and seeing it as a resource for people, a way to help, was a way for me to give back. And it just helped me to process the loss and make sense of it, I think. And I think my kids, because this project didn't really come live until, now they're 24 and 26 years old. So they're old enough to see what it's doing in the world and see what it's created. So I think their relationship to it is a little different now because they're seeing it as adults. At the onset of all of this, they were children. But I think they're really proud of me, which is sweet.
Oh, I'm sure.
And I love that.
Oh, I'm sure they are. Not just losing your parents suddenly, but when your parents die, there's this connection in the world that's lost. Even if they die of old age.
Yes.
It's that grounding connection that I've read about.
Yes, but some connections remain, and I'd like to address that because so my parents spent, at the time of their accident, they were spending the majority of the year in Jackson, Wyoming. And they were very deeply embedded in this community. They were volunteers, and they were fundraisers, and they were philanthropists, and they took classes at the Art Association, and they did so much in this community, and they were well loved. So when, at the time of the accident, I was living in Colorado, and we ended up moving up here 2 years later. Part of the reason we did that was because every time we would come visit, we would inevitably run into people who said, I loved your parents. They were remarkable people. It's great to see you. It keeps them close having you here. And so, yeah.
That's really great. And
Yeah.
I love hearing that. And that you can still have those connections.
I still do. I still run into people, and those stories just, boom, it's like they're right there. It's so healing. It's terrific.
Yes, really heartwarming.
Yeah, it's good. It is good.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, Caryn.
My pleasure, Emmy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Your Why? Brought to you by Wyoming Humanities with support from Wyoming Community Foundation and generous supporters like you. To learn more, go to thinkwhy.org, subscribe, and never miss a show.